From New York City, I'm Stephen Shalowitz, and this is the One Way Ticket Show.
Hello and welcome once again to another episode of the show where we explore with our guests where they'd go if given a one-way ticket, no coming back. Their destinations may be in the past, present, future, real, imaginary, or even a state of mind. But once again, the only caveat, there's no coming back. Now, you can listen to all episodes on our website, theonewayticketshow.com. Once again, theonewayticketshow.com, where you can search for The One Way Ticket Show wherever you like to download your podcast. And of course, while you're at it, do rate and review us because that makes it easier for more folks around the world to find us. And one more point of housekeeping, if you haven't done so already, do follow me on all social media at Stephen Shalowitz. Once again, at Stephen Shalowitz, and Stephen is spelled with a V. All right, as for this episode, it's an absolute privilege for me to welcome onto the program Gretchen Carlson, a woman whose work and career I've long admired. Gretchen is an acclaimed journalist, author, speaker, and internationally recognized trailblazer for women's rights in the workplace. In 2016, she boldly went public with harassment claims against then Fox News chairman and CEO Roger Ailes, paving the way for the Me Too movement. No stranger to the small screen, though, Gretchen spent 30 years working as a journalist. She notably hosted the Saturday edition of The Early Show on CBS News, Fox News, Fox and Friends, and The Real Story with Gretchen Carlson. But today, Gretchen is ushering in a new movement as a co-founder of Lift Our Voices. It's a nonprofit fighting to eradicate forced arbitration clauses and non-disclosure agreements in workplace contracts that keep toxic workplace issues silent. We'll be talking about that, of course, in our conversation. Now, Gretchen is also a New York Times bestselling author. Her autobiography, penned in 2014, is titled Getting Real, and her second book is Be Fierce: Stop Harassment and Take Your Power Back. You can pick up a copy of both wherever you like to buy your books. I read them both cover to cover and cannot recommend them enough. And before your daughters and sons go off to college this fall, you must buy that book, Be Fierce, for them. They need to read it. And of course, we'll have a link to both books and all things Gretchen Carlson on the show notes page of this very episode on our website, theonewayticketshow.com. But for now, we are absolutely delighted to welcome Gretchen Carlson aboard the One Way Ticket Show, who joins us now via Zoom from her home office in Connecticut. Welcome to the program, Gretchen.
Thank you. And thank you for that very gracious introduction.
All right. Listen, we have so many bases to cover, Gretchen. And as I do with all of my guests, I start our conversation with your one-way ticket journey. So without further ado, Gretchen Carlson, if I did indeed give you that one-way ticket, past, present, future, real, imaginary, or even a state of mind, where would you go?
Well, I definitely wouldn't want to come back from this, so I'm glad that's part of the deal. I would want to go to a world where courage in coming forward about bad behavior at work is celebrated and not punished.
And in all 11 years of doing this program, that's a first for our show. And I'm so glad that you were the one that was able to deliver that one-way ticket destination. There's a lot to unpack there. And I first want to unpack the word courage. And I'm just wondering, Gretchen, do you think courage is something that we're either born with? Is it something that we can just be thrust into? Can we learn a combination thereof?
It's a combination. Thank you for the question. I credit my parents for bringing me up and raising me to be a gutsy kid and for instilling in me the motivation and desire to always speak up for myself when things just didn't feel right in my gut. And I started that at a young age. When I was 5 years old in kindergarten, on the first day of school, I got put in the wrong reading group. Unfortunately, back then, they used to put you in can't read and can read groups. And I could read, but they put me in the couldn't read. And 3 times that day, I went up to the desk of my teacher and pleaded with her that I was in the wrong group. And I ran home from school and I told my mom, and she called the school, and the next day it all got sorted out. But I tell that story because what would have happened if I hadn't stood up for myself at 5 years old? Could have completely changed my educational trajectory or anything in life about standing up for yourself. So I credit my parents for raising me to always speak up. However, I also believe that it's at least 50% inherent in the person as well, that I've always had that fire in my belly. And I think that is something that came at birth. Sometimes I wish I could shut it off, but it's a good trait to have when you decide to take on one of the most powerful men in the world, called Roger Ailes, who used to be the CEO and chairman of Fox News. So it started early on for me, and it's something that I continue to work on. And for anyone listening, this is a skill that you can learn. over time. And I hope I'm an inspiration to other people to do that.
And it's about taking baby steps, isn't it, to develop that courage and to develop that confidence.
100%. I always say, especially for women who are listening, we socialize our boys to take risks. We tell them to skin their knees and jump off of the fence and get risky about everything. And girls, we tell them to go sit in the corner and look nice with their pretty hair and bows and play with their Barbies. And we need to change the way that we socialize our young kids, because that affects us later on in life. Specifically with girls, I say, sit in the front row every opportunity you get, raise your hand at every opportunity. Even when I do that now in a meeting, my heart still thumps because I get nervous about it, but I make myself do it. I always ask a question. And in that way, when your voice is heard, that's when you start to make an impact. And that's how you build the courage in baby steps. When you see you succeed, that you go then on to the next step, and it might be a much more bold move.
Well, Gretchen, I think that your destination is very much framed by the work that you're doing right now with your organization, Lift Our Voices. And so I want to go there. If you can share a little bit about the organization, and then I want to talk about those two pieces of bipartisan legislation that you shepherded through and passed and had passed, and really congratulations for that, because that's a gargantuan task, knowing just how Washington works. I mean, it really operates at a snail's pace.
Yes. So right after my story at Fox News, when I sued Roger Ailes for harassment in the workplace, for basically firing me from my job that I had killed myself for, basically because I refused to acquiesce, I started hearing from thousands of women across our country. And I realized that there were two epidemics. There was the epidemic, unfortunately, of harassment in the workplace. I didn't even understand that, because you're made to feel so alone. And why are you made to feel so alone? The silencing mechanisms in the workplace that have just exploded into an epidemic as well. And the stories I heard from these women were all eerily similar. They had been treated horribly. They found the courage to come forward. They thought they were doing the right thing. They were immediately shunted into these secret chambers, something called arbitration. And then they also were forced to sign non-disclosure agreements. And nobody ever heard from them ever again. And the shocking thing to me was that the perpetrators got to keep on working because nobody knew about it. And the woman who had the courage to come forward never worked in her chosen profession ever again. I would say 99% of the women who reached out to me, that was what ended up happening to them. And I was like, this is frickin' BS. Like, I cannot let this stand. I have to dig deep, like I did as a little kid, and find the courage a second time around to do something about this. And so I started walking the halls of Congress, and I aligned with wonderful organizations that were already doing this advocacy work, but they really needed sort of a celebrity of sorts to bring some attention to these wonky issues. And so it was like a perfect storm. They had all the resources. I had that kind of relatability, and people had heard of me before, and suddenly they could get people to start paying attention to these issues. And then after a couple of years, I formed my nonprofit, Lift Our Voices, because I really just wanted to form an umbrella organization to serve me and so many others with trying to make changes. And then with regard to the legislation, in the most hyper-political time of our generation, it was an amazing feat to not only pass one bipartisan bill, but two last year. It was a 5-year slog, but we accomplished it. So basically, in a nutshell, in people's work contracts, they don't even know they have these things, but if they have a forced arbitration clause, it can no longer be used for any sexual misconduct claim, meaning that you can file in an open court. And secondarily now, you can no longer be silenced with an NDA if you sign one on your first day of work up until you file any kind of legal action. So these were two of the biggest labor law changes in the last 100 years, but we are far from done in our mission at Lift Our Voices.
Fantastic. And again, congratulations, because as I said, I mean, DC works at really a snail's pace. And so this is really a game changer for so many people, because I mean, even yours truly, when I had to sign my contract, I had, you read it, but you really don't understand the nuts and bolts of it. And so this is really a game changer. And then I'm just curious, what other pieces of legislation then are you working on now, or are you at liberty to share that at this moment?
Yes. So our strategy, Steve, from the beginning was to take a bite out of the apple. We didn't want to go for the whole shebang, because after covering politics for 30 years myself, I understood that to pass anything, it had to be bipartisan. and to try and get both parties together for getting rid of NDAs for everything, for example, or getting rid of forced arbitration for all toxic workplace issues. I knew I wouldn't be able to do it. So we decided to tackle sexual misconduct first because that was really my issue. But now we are going back, now that we've laid the groundwork, we've already built this bipartisan coalition in both the House and the Senate. And so that's how we passed the NDA bill so quickly, just 8 months after the arbitration one, because we already had these relationships. Now we're going back for more. And in a matter of days, we're going to be introducing an amendment to the forced arbitration law for another protected class. I'm not at liberty to say which one it is yet, but I'll tell you all the ones we're fighting for.
Sure.
We're fighting for race discrimination, gender, LGBTQ rights discrimination, age, disability, religion. So anything that would fall under a human rights violation, are fighting for those protected classes and those groups to not be forced into silence. So we're right back at it on Capitol Hill and really excited about introducing this new piece of legislation. And what makes it easier now, Steve, is that this will just be an amendment to the arbitration law that we passed. So we don't have to go back and wordsmith it and go between the parties and be like, oh, we got to change the word the and the word is and all that kind of stuff. We're basically just amending with another protected class. So our strategy is proving to be a good one and really excited about moving forward with this.
Well, really, congratulations. And we'll keep our listeners posted definitely when that amendment comes through indeed. And then really also just to take a step back from a 30,000 foot approach, can we talk about just how pervasive harassment is in the workplace and sexual harassment? And I heard you've told a story several times. I want you to share it here about how you were on CNN. I'm prompting you here and how you came home and what your son asked you about, because I think that is really, really telling.
Yeah, look, when you make a decision like I did, speaking of courage, it's not something I decided like the night before. Yeah. This was years in the making because I had to have my ducks in a row. We still live in a he said, she said environment, but especially 7 years ago we did. And so I really had to build up the courage. And one of the most important pieces of that puzzle was getting my familial support. And I'm blessed to still have my parents in my life, and getting their blessing on this was really, really important. That finally happened. My husband, obviously, and then my 2 children who were middle schoolers at the time, a boy and a girl. And I was so worried about what would happen to them when they went back to school in the fall. And I did not want them to be made fun of. Middle school is hard enough. And I really underestimated how this would change the lives of my children in a positive way. Could have never expected that. But both of my children found courage and bravery in their lives a short time after, as well as advocacy. So my daughter came home from school that fall, and she said, Mom, the first thing was that the teacher had called her up to the front of the room and wanted her to share what happened to her mom over the summer.
Oh, gosh.
And just as I was ready to pick up the phone and call the school, she goes, and Mom, I was so proud to tell everyone that you were my mom. And a couple of weeks later, she found the courage to tell some girls who had been making life hard for her. She told them off. And then she came home and she said, Mom, I did it because I saw you do it. And I thought, oh my God, like a light went off in my head, like maybe this is all going to be okay. And then you're alluding to when I was on this CNN town hall talking about these issues. And I came home and my son, who was 12 at the time, was waiting for me in the kitchen. He said, Mom, is it true what that other woman said on the show, that every 73 seconds in America, a woman is assaulted or harassed? And I said, I'm so sorry to tell you, honey, that is true. And he said, Mom, as a young man, I want to help fix that. And that is when the skies opened. And I was like, hallelujah, because I realized that what I did had changed my children's lives. And even if that's all that ever happened, it was absolutely amazing. But I know that what I've done is so much more far-reaching. And I often say that through my advocacy work at Lift Our Voices and changing laws and educating people about these silencing mechanisms, that I am helping millions of people that I will never meet. So my children obviously are so close to me and I've seen the impact, but I'm also impacting millions of other people who may never know who I am or for sure meet me. But boy, does that give me a tremendous amount of gratitude in my heart.
And you're creating courage for others. And, you know, Gretchen, there was something that you wrote in your book, Getting Real, and it was during your time as Miss America, and when you were giving speeches and talking to people, and you wrote here, I was trying to be real, to be myself, to show my flaws, which is why I talked about being overweight as a child. I wanted young women and girls to look at me and think, if she could do it, I can too. And when I read that, I thought to myself, you know, that was such a precursor for what you're doing right now. Again, giving that courage to women, girls, but also, I mean, frankly, to men as well, because, you know, for me, I was not sexually harassed at work, but my first job out of the gate, right out of college, I was verbally and psychologically harassed beyond belief. And dare I say, it was a woman boss, but my last boss that I did have was a woman boss who I absolutely adored, but I was also harassed psychologically also and verbally by male bosses throughout my career. And obviously can't talk about it because I also have an NDA as well. But the reason I bring this up is because it really does impact one's self-esteem, one's confidence, and one's ability to work. And I know that that first experience gripped me in such a way that it sidelined me from taking risks and doing so much that I really wanted to do. And I know that there was so much more that I could have done at the time, but I didn't because I was afraid. And like everybody else, I wanted to keep my job. I was going to grad school the next year, and I really needed something to do in between. I'm not suggesting what happened to me was in the league of sexual harassment, but I remember there was a quote in your book, Be Fierce, where a woman said, it's very difficult to do your job if you keep getting hit on.
Yeah.
And so this is a very roundabout way of having you talk to the notion that if people are harassed at work, no matter what that harassment is, there's such an economic downside to a company, and the productivity level just drops of that individual, and the company does not get, a company or a fire station, a police station, an airline, whatever it is, the military, they don't get the best out of that individual. And so this is why the work that you're doing is so important and why I wanted to have this conversation.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your personal story. I hear so many of them, and it's always difficult to hear them because it makes me realize that this is happening all the time.
Yeah.
And that is why I'm working so hard to change. I think what you really brought to life there, though, is this vicious cycle that so many people find themselves in, and that we've been in it for the last 40 years or so. And that is that people feel like they have no recourse, right? Because they feel like if they come forward, they'll lose their job or they'll be retaliated against. So in many cases, they don't. And then, as I mentioned before, the people who do have the courage to come forward, they have these silencing mechanisms in their contracts that they don't even know that they signed. They don't have any understanding of them. And so then once they come forward, they're screwed, because then they go to these silencing chambers like arbitration, and they're fired and nobody ever hears from them. And the vicious cycle continues. And the perpetrator gets to keep on the job, and you can't warn anyone else what's happening. And so it's a combination of changing laws, educating people about these mechanisms so that we learn to not sign contracts that have them in them. It's also getting to companies to encourage them to take these mechanisms out to increase their bottom line and retain the people that they want to, which are women and people of color. And it's also changing culture to not have this thing that we instill in people at such a young age to be retaliatory against people who have the courage to come forward. And I will tell you that from all of my work, I can say with expert opinion, unfortunately, that it is tougher to change culture on these issues than it is to pass bipartisan legislation in these hyper-political times. And that is saying a tremendous amount, because culture is something that is embedded in us at a young age, and we see it happening early on. And back to that story about my son, we need to get to our boys early on so that they learn to respect women. It tends to be more of a male issue, right? But to our females too, so that they respect people and treat them with dignity. And changing culture is something that is certainly on our agenda, but it's tougher to do than even changing laws.
And I want to ask you about this power dynamic, Gretchen, because when it comes to sexual harassment, any kind of harassment, at its core, it's about power. a powerful person and someone that's a subordinate. And I'm wondering, what is it about power? What are those root causes? Is it narcissism, low self-esteem? What are your thoughts?
I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I feel kind of
like. But you play one on television.
Well, yeah, no, that, yes, because I counsel so many people who reach out. But also I said I feel like a half lawyer because I actually took my LSATs and wanted to go to law school, and then I ended up in journalism and I never got there. But from everything I've been through, I sort of have a good legal mind on some of this stuff. I would just be venturing a guess on why people go on these power trips. But number one, I would say insecurity. And narcissism, probably evilness. But the last thing I would say is because they can. You know, people in these positions, they can. And for somebody like me, even though I can't get into the exact details of what happened to me, I can say, hypothetically, when you have one of the most powerful men in the world as your boss, and everything about your success there and your promotion rests on his decisions, he knows that. And he can use that against you. And if you don't acquiesce, he can also retaliate. And, you know, so that puts the person in an incredibly difficult situation. So I wish I was a psychologist to be able to give you the exact reason why people do this, but I think it has a lot to do with how we raise our boys, and goes back to what I was saying about socialization. We need to socialize our boys and our girls at equal levels.
Gretchen, you used the word toxic just a moment ago, and about a week or so ago, I interviewed a professor in public policy and leadership at the University of Mississippi. And I told him that you were going to be a guest on the show. And I asked him whether or not he taught this notion of what's going on in the world today in terms of harassment and sexual harassment. He said, we absolutely do. He said, and we do it under the rubric of the toxic triangle, the destructive leader, the susceptible followers, and then the conducive environment. And that's what you're talking about. It's this whole ecosystem. So if we were to zero in on those susceptible followers, I'm guessing that the legislation that you've passed will help those susceptible followers along the way, even if they were not themselves the victims of harassment.
Yeah, great point. And I love that description of how it all works, because there are so many witnesses who have come forward and they've also been penalized.
Right.
In fact, I wrote about a lot of these men in Be Fierce. I did a whole chapter, Men Who Defend. I never intended to, but I started finding out that most men in this world are good. And they want to help in these situations. And some of these men, when they did, they came forward for women and they were fired. So that also stops witnesses from coming forward because they're going to face the same retaliation as the actual subject. But yes, to the laws that have helped to change that. So specifically my Speak Out Act, which was my second bipartisan bill to pass last year federally, which got rid of NDAs for sexual misconduct, it also includes witnesses. So if you had signed an NDA when you came to work, and by the way, 1/3 of all Americans sign NDAs on their first day on the job, and not just to protect trade secrets, but they can't talk about anything that happens to them at work on day one, even before anything's actually happened to them, which is crazy. So all of those people now are released from their NDAs with regard to sexual misconduct, including witnesses of it, up until the point where there's an actual legal filing. So yes, this gives power. It gives voice and power back to the worker, to the person who's actually experiencing the bad behavior, and the people who are witnessing it. And we were very adamant about that witness part of it being included in the bill because of the exact triangle that you talked about. It's an essential part of curing this problem, is to give voice to witnesses and also stopping the retaliation that comes at them.
Let's talk about HR, because at one point in the book, Be Fierce, you quoted someone as saying HR is the KGB. And I absolutely love. Was it your lawyer that said that?
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. I thought that was hysterical. I mean, it was hysterical in a funny way, but it's a sad truth, actually. But one of the big takeaways that I got from that section when you talked about HR is this notion that if somebody is harassed, they need to keep documents of everything. They need to keep their voicemails, everything, but they should keep it at home. Do not keep it at work. And I want you just to weigh in on that.
Yeah, well, first of all HR executives are not the KGB, but that one of my lawyers uses that phrase in a sort of funny way, as you point out. because we've all sort of been, I'm going to use one of my Midwestern terms here from growing up in Minnesota, but it's a good one. We've all been hornswoggled into
fellow Midwesterner, I'm from Chicago, so there you go.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, sure.
Yes.
But we've all been hornswoggled into believing that HR is your friend. And I'm here to tell you today that they are not. It's been a brilliant PR move. And again, I know so many HR executives out there are wonderful people, and I don't even think they want to handle these issues, to be honest with you. But they get into the system. They get into the cultural way that we've always handled these things that I'm trying to dismantle, which is, oh my gosh, we have to silence these people when they come forward, and we have to get rid of them instead of getting rid of the problem. And so you have to understand that going to HR, although they tell you that that's what you have to do, you must first talk to a lawyer, because you have to figure out if you have a forced arbitration clause in your contract and what that means. And you have to find out if you signed an NDA and what that means. And you have to find out if you have a case. So even if it's just a 10-minute conversation, you have to do that first. And I point that out in chapter 4 in my book, Be Fierce, my playbook. Number 2 is you have to, as you said, gather evidence, and you have to take it home. Because I can't tell you, Steve, how many people I talked to over the years who had done just that. They had gotten evidence, but they left it in their office. And after they went to HR and they were fired on the spot, they couldn't go back to their office to get it. So you have to take it home. And number 3 is, as we just talked about witnesses, you have to tell somebody and you have to document it, because we still have this he said, she said notion in the world. And if you have evidence, great. But if you've also told people and documented, even the better. So that's sort of my top 3 points that you need to do, and really give going to HR some thought. But at the same time, for HR executives who may be listening, or people who work at corporate jobs, we have to start changing the system from the inside too. We can't just do the old school method of punishing the person who comes forward. And that brings me back to the place where I want to go and never come back again, which is where people come forward and they are no longer punished, and that somehow we have changed culture to celebrate those people and to get rid of the bad people.
How long do you think it's going to take, Gretchen, before we get to your destination?
Yeah, I don't know. I may be like taking a supersonic jet. Like if that, I don't know. It's going to take a long time, unfortunately. Look, we can't even get to pay equity yet. And, what's so tough about paying people the same price for the same job? I don't get it, but we haven't been able to achieve that. And so I'm all about transparency on that as well. In Great Britain now, you have to publish what people get paid. And I don't know why we don't do that here, but that will probably never pass. I may try that, though, next with the bipartisan piece of legislation. But the most important thing is to, in my mind, is to start changing culture by changing the laws, which is what I'm doing. So in a way, we're forcing people to do it. And then it's through that we educate people. And then at Lift Our Voices, we're also doing a tremendous amount of research to change the hearts and minds of people. For example, we're ready to come out with this fascinating poll that we just did that is going to show that Republicans and Democrats, by an overwhelming margin, agree on a lot of these issues. And that's so powerful when we go to stakeholders and lawmakers and say, see, this is why for your constituents, you should do this. So it's sort of it's all these things. I always say it's fixing this as a tangled web. It's changing laws, it's educating, it's research, it's getting to corporations and encouraging them to change their policies now before I totally force them to do it. Like it would be a great PR move for them to do it now and join our efforts and our mission and say, look, we want to be a better employer to our people. We want to be open and transparent, and we want our culture to be safe. And, by the way, later this year, we're publishing the first ever corporate rating system. So we're going to rate the top 3,000 public companies about whether or not they silence their people with forced arbitration or NDAs. And employees are now going to be able to come to our website and see for themselves where they want to work. And more employees don't want to work at places that clamp down on them. So this will be not only an amazing resource for the millions of employees in America to go to, but this will also be a subtle push to companies, because we're going to grade them. And if you get a bad grade from us, you're not going to like that. So I always say the train has left the station. Jump on board. We're not going back in this movement. Join our forces and be more transparent, because it is the wave of the future.
And are you finding that the HR executives that you're speaking to these days, they're a little bit more receptive to this?
Yeah. Look, they get their paycheck from the top of the company, right? So that's where we really need to start. I have spoken at only 2 HR seminars in the last 7 years, if that says anything, and they were 2 brave consortiums who reached out to me. I wish more would, but we really need to get to the hearts and minds of CEOs because the buck really stops with them, and they're mostly men still. So I always extend an olive branch and say, men, we need you to help us. We need you in this fight. Because imagine if a CEO says on the first day of coming into a company, I'm going to celebrate people who come forward with courage and tell me about what's wrong at this workplace and how they're being treated poorly. I'm going to celebrate that. I'm not going to denigrate you or punish you or push you out. I am going to get rid of the bad person after an independent investigation, if it proves to be true. Imagine the dynamic shift if that actually happened with all of our very powerful CEOs. So those are the people that I try to get to. And I'll share this story with you that when I was in your hometown of Chicago a couple of years ago, speaking to a powerful CEO, after I did my whole presentation on the detrimental impact of forced arbitration and NDAs, the CEO raised his hand in the room and he said to his general counsel, do we have those things? And the general counsel said, yeah. And he goes, not anymore. And he took them that day. And that proves the impact of how I can change people, but I need to clone myself because I need to get to, thousands of CEOs every single day to try and get them to understand the detrimental impact of these silencing mechanisms. It's not that they're naive. It's that they are paying attention to many other things every single day of work. And it's up to their general counsel and their HR to be putting these policies into boilerplate contracts. And once you find out that you're pushing out the exact people you want to retain to increase your bottom line through these silencing mechanisms, then I think you get on the train and you join our fight.
Wow, that's a powerful story.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
it's good. That's going to impact. And presumably when that CEO speaks to his CEO friends, then there could potentially be a ripple effect.
And that CEO, their company is about to become one of our founding sponsors at Lift Our Voices. So that, not only are they changing their policies, but they're also supporting our mission at Lift Our Voices because they believe in us. And look, we need to fundraise to make this happen. We're the only organization in the United States doing this work. And we believe that this is the silver bullet to all equity. Because if you are a company that silences your people, you probably also don't treat them fairly in other areas like pay equity and promoting them adequately. So we believe getting rid of silencing mechanisms finally gets us to equality.
Gretchen, do you think there's more of an appetite to hire back these women and some men, of course, who lost their jobs and were totally blackballed now? Like, where does that whole thing stand?
Oh gosh, you're preaching to the choir to me on that one. You're speaking my mission. I've also said to CEOs, instead of talking about rehabbing all of these people that get pushed out because they actually did the bad behavior, what about bringing back all the people that got pushed out for absolutely no wrong reason? That is also an incredible move that people in power could do. I can't tell you how many wonderfully talented women just at Fox News alone who are not working in the industry anymore because they've all been silenced and pushed out, whether they were victims of Bill O'Reilly or Roger Ailes or a myriad of other people there. They're not working anymore. And they were at the top of their game. And that's just a microcosm of the problem. Like Fox News, is just a small sliver. This is happening everywhere. And so if you figure out how many people have been pushed out, I mean, it's probably in the millions. And how do we restore the dignity for those people? It's by hiring them back and not blackballing them. Look, people aren't going to come into the new company and be like, hey, I can hardly wait to find the next lawsuit that I can file. Because guess what? Filing lawsuits sucks. It ain't fun to come forward. It's horrible. And you're maligned and you're treated horribly and you possibly lose your job and you possibly never work again. So let's change that dynamic. Let's celebrate these people and rehire them.
Gretchen, I always like to ask my guests whom they would like to take with them on their one-way ticket journeys into their destinations. And I'm guessing that you would probably like to take all these people that were fired, laid off, et cetera, with you and have them all rehired. I don't think I'm wrong in that. Is there anyone else that you would like to take with you?
Thank you for that, because I was just going to say that. In fact, I dedicated Be Fierce to all of those silenced people because I needed to pay tribute to all these people who had gone before me and never had their voice heard and never worked again. I don't know. Let's say that I'm going to take all the CEOs in America with me too, to come to the promised land of a place where we celebrate people who come forward and we don't treat them badly.
Right. I like that. Well, when you talked about changing a culture, and you have always had your pulse on the culture of America, and also in your book, Getting Real, there was something that you wrote towards the end of the book, and I wanted you to comment on it as it relates not only to the work that you're doing, but I think the overall culture in the United States. You wrote here, rather than bend our values to fit the times, we need to fit the times to our values. And I thought that was actually rather powerful because when I read that, I was thinking to myself, okay, we're the same vintage. And I thought to myself, okay, when I was growing up, we were taught manners, we were taught civility, we were taught respect, we were taught those things. Yet on a parallel basis, there was so much bad behavior going on in corporate America, in the military, in the you name it. So it was these dual worlds. So it's almost as if we're trying to take the best from the past and put it into now, so that we can create that new culture and do away with that whole parallel universe of that bad behavior, yet take that core essence of what was good in the past and bring it into today and into tomorrow.
Wow, that's really deep. I love that. Yes. And that takes courage. That takes courage to do that. Instead, what we have happening right now is this intense focus on DEI and ESG, which is wonderful. But what I don't want it to be is what you just talked about, which is sort of a cover your ass facade. Like saying that you believe in this stuff, right? And you value it, but not really acting on it. And there's a huge difference between saying that you're going to lift up these people and actually doing it. And that's where I think we actually find the perfect place, is when you actually start doing these things and actually changing your policies and actually promoting more people of color and women and so forth, rather than just talking about it. And that's what I'm encouraging companies to do in 2023 and beyond.
In the time that we have remaining, there's a bunch of other questions that I really wanted to ask you, Gretchen. And the first is, of course, I know that you signed an NDA, so of course, I'm not going to ask you anything about Fox, but I'd love to know what goes through your mind when you're driving down 6th Avenue past the Fox HQ.
Yeah, I don't drive down that street.
Okay.
I try not to walk down that street. I try not to walk on any of the side streets. In fact, when I visit Sirius XM, which is across the street from Fox News, I do not go in on the particular side of the street that would be next to Fox. I go in, luckily there's another side entrance on the other street. Yeah, I don't really want to go near there. And I think that it's actually like, why should I bring myself down? Like, I've moved on. I'm doing so many great things now and helping so many other people that I don't really want to be reminded of my time there. I don't watch Fox News. I have no idea I read in the news sometimes because it's hard to escape some of the craziness. But yeah, I try not to think about them much. Other than this, I did have to sign an NDA. And back then, 7 years ago, that was sort of the way things worked, right? Okay, you're going to get a resolution. And so we're going to have you sign this NDA, and that's sort of the trade-off. How did I know back then that I would start doing all this work and that a short time later, within 5 or 6 years, we'd actually be talking about banning NDAs? Like, I could have never known that. And so had I known that, I would have never signed that stupid thing, because the number one thing people say to me is that they want to have their own voice back. And after they sign the NDA, it's too late. So yeah, that's one thing that I still am in contact with Fox about, because I've demanded for them to release me from my NDA and basically have said that if you've changed everything there like you say that you have, then why don't you let me out? Like, what's the fear of giving me my truth and my voice back? And I've had no response. So that would be the only reason why I'd want to walk down that street to be anywhere near. But so far, all the FedExes that I've sent have been not responded to.
Okay, so we'll have to stay tuned on that one.
Yeah.
But related to Fox, so July 6, 2016 was the day that you filed the sexual harassment lawsuit against Roger Ailes. So it's going to be 7 years in just a couple of weeks as we record this. I'm wondering what goes through your mind then also on that day. Do you mark the day in any particular way? Because that day had such a profound impact on the trajectory of your life, yet it also had an enormous impact, as we've seen through the work that you're doing right now, on thousands and thousands of other lives.
Yeah, it's always an incredibly emotional day for me. In fact, I'm getting teary now because it just takes me back to how difficult it was to do what I did. And there's this photo that I found of, I don't know if it's a man or a woman, but it's just a photo of their feet and their tennis shoes, and they're stepping off of the Empire State Building. And I'm not trying to suggest that people should do that, but I've posted it a couple times on the anniversary because that's how I felt. I was jumping off the cliff all by myself, and there was no safety net below. And then I figured out there actually was. And that was all these people who started reaching out to me. And so it's really emotional day for me. And sometimes I cry for the whole day, like just thinking about all the people out there who had horrible things happen to them as well and who have never been vindicated. Sometimes it's just a sea of emotions because doing something like what I did was just so scary and so over the top. And then sometimes it's just like tears of joy because we've come so far. And oftentimes, if I have the opportunity to be with my kids on that day, I just hug them extra tight because that's why I'm doing all this work. It's like for the next generation of my daughter and my son to not have to face this and the millions of other young people. So it's like a confluence of a ton of emotions on that day. I don't know what I'm going to post this year on July 6th, but I'll give it a lot of thought before, and it'll undoubtedly be a very emotional day.
Gretchen, a couple of days ago, I was speaking to a friend of mine, and he asked me who I have coming up, next on the show. And I said, I've got Peter Greenberg, the CBS travel expert. It'll be his second visit. Jay Johnson, who was Obama's Homeland Security Secretary. Yeah. And I said, I'm going to be interviewing Gretchen Carlson on Tuesday. And he paused and he said, Stephen, you really better do your homework. She really knows her stuff. Okay. and you really do know your stuff. But after he said that, I was wondering to myself, apart from the fact that, okay, Lonnie, his name's Lonnie. I was like, okay, Lonnie, don't make me more anxious than I already am, probably. I said, but the other thing is, I thought to myself, there was such a fire hose of information about harassment, the workplace, sexual harassment, this whole subject. It has so many different facets. And, you were an honor student at Stanford. Again, you took the LSATs, you were an investigative reporter. Clearly you're highly, highly intelligent, but I'm just wondering, what was your approach in terms of harnessing all of this information and really distilling it into a very easily and understandable language that we can all understand and that Congress especially can act on? Because as you know, bills sometimes are, 12 billion pages long.
Yeah, the beauty of our bills was that they were really short so people could actually read them, which was the goal of it. Because remember, I don't know, all these other bills, I know what you're talking about. They're like thousands of pages long.
Yeah.
But I think that skill comes from what I studied at Stanford, actually. And so my major was organizational behavior. And basically that is being a problem solver. And if I had used my major in the real world, I would have been a corporate consultant. I would have been the person that came in from above, right? And would look at everything and figure out how to improve things. And that's sort of what I'm doing now, in the sense that I'm going in and I'm figuring out, okay, how do I bring these bipartisan coalitions together? How do I get people to join my fight? And one of the easiest ways that I figured out was that when I would walk into an office of a senator or member of Congress, a representative, whether it was Republican or Democrat, I would say to them, raise your hand if you would like to continue silencing people who've been sexually assaulted or harassed at work. and nobody would raise their hand. And then undoubtedly, they would start telling me about stories that had happened to their family members. And I would say to them, you're proving my point, because this is not political. This is not partisan. This is apolitical, and this is a human rights issue. And that's how I really tried to put this incredibly complicated issue into a simple explanation. Then trying to explain forced arbitration and non-disclosure agreements. Most people know what an NDA is, but they have no idea they've signed one. Most people have no freaking idea what forced arbitration is. That's harder to distill down into a simple explanation. But basically, it means that you are going to go to a secret chamber instead of having your Seventh Amendment right to go to a jury trial. That's what it means. And nobody's ever going to hear from you ever again. And you're going to be punished. That's the easiest way to say what's going to happen to you in arbitration. But yeah, I think those skills come from learning all of that in college. And I'm a very black and white person. I make decisions quickly, and I'm either like yes or no. And so I think that has been helpful in building out my strategy.
And so just one or two other quick bases before we push off, because I'm super mindful of the clock. You are hopeful then that we will get to your one-way ticket destination?
Yes. Oh, I never answered how long it's going to take. I think I was trying to put you off because I'm hoping it's going to be sooner than it might actually be. Let's start with baby steps. I'm incredibly optimistic about the movement. We've made great strides in a short period of time. It's my goal to pass bipartisan legislation once a year until we get every protected class covered. So if you figure there's about 7 protected classes left, so that would be 7 years. And that would force every company to not be able to use arbitration or NDAs, which will help us get to celebrating people who come forward a lot quicker. So I'm going to say optimistically 25 years.
Okay. We'll hopefully have you on the program before that. But in the meantime, Gretchen Carlson, this has been really just so eye-opening and so instructive and informative. We want to thank you so much for all the work that you do and for joining us here on the One Way Ticket Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Once again, Gretchen's books are Getting Real and Be Fierce, Stop Harassment and Take Your Power Back. You can pick up a copy wherever you like to buy your books. And again, give them to your daughters and sons before they go to college. You will thank me later for that. And we'll have a link to the books and all things Gretchen Carlson and all of her work on the show notes page of this episode on our website, theonewayticketshow.com. Gretchen, next time you're on, we'll have to talk about travel because I know you're a world traveler yourself.
Yes, I love it. And I would love to talk about it.
All right. And no matter where you are in the world, do shoot me an email, Stephen@theonewayticketshow.com. Once again, Stephen's with a V, Stephen@theonewayticketshow.com. Do share your one-way ticket destination. Let's even arrange a call and chat because I am always up for great conversation. Meantime, it's a wrap for this edition of the One Way Ticket Show. For Gretchen Carlson and the entire crew, I'm Stephen Shalowitz, and we'll see you next time.